There's something about road trips that makes them feel like an adventure waiting to unfold. The long stretches of empty highways, the eerie silence of remote roads, and the unknown lurking beyond the headlights. But for some travelers, the journey takes a sinister turn, one that they will never forget if they even survive to tell the tale. Buckle up, because tonight I bring you 5 terrifying true road trip horror stories that I personally lived through. My first experience, the Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was a late autumn night when my friends and I were driving through the back roads of Oregon. The highway was empty. The only sound was the low hum of our car's engine. The moon was barely visible behind thick clouds, casting long shadows along the road. We had been driving for hours, exhaustion creeping into our bones when we saw her. A woman in a white dress standing on the side of the road, her head tilted down. Her long hair draped over her face, and something about her posture felt unnatural. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My friend in the passenger seat muttered, "Should we stop?" Against my better judgment, I slowed the car and pulled over. She stood motionless for a moment before stepping forward. The way she moved, it was almost like she glided toward us. The window slightly and asked, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman's voice was barely above a whisper as she muttered, "Thank you." She opened the back door and got in. The air in the car instantly felt heavier. Something wasn't right. We continued driving in silence. I adjusted the rearview mirror to glance at her, but all I could see was the top of her head, her hair covering her face. My hands felt clammy against the steering wheel. "Where are you headed?" I asked. No response. I swallowed hard and focused on the road. After a few minutes, I looked back again. The back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes. My friends gasped, turning around. "She's gone," my friend in the back seat shouted. I threw the car into park and got out, scanning the dark, empty road behind us. There was nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. We sped to the nearest gas station, barely able to speak. When I told the gas station attendant what had happened, his face turned ghostly pale. That stretch of road, a woman died there 20 years ago. People still see her sometimes. I barely slept that night, replaying the moment she vanished over and over. The next morning, when I checked the back seat again, my stomach dropped. A single muddy footprint was pressed into the seat, and the air still smelled faintly of perfume. Some say she appears to those in need of a warning. Others say she's looking for a way home. But if she ever gets into your car, she never really leaves. Second story of mine, the man in the rearview mirror. I had been driving for hours, my eyelids growing heavy as the road stretched endlessly before me. I reached for the radio dial, hoping some music would keep me awake, but all I got was static. A deep, distorted hum filled the car before cutting out. That's when I noticed something strange. My rearview mirror seemed off. At first, I couldn't place it, but then my blood ran cold. A shape, a dark silhouette sitting in my back seat. My breath hitched. I forced myself to look forward, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I told myself it was just exhaustion, my eyes playing tricks on me. But when I dared to glance back again, closer this time, I saw it. A wide grin, cold, unblinking eyes staring at me through the mirror. I let out an involuntary gasp and swerved off the road. My tires skidded against the pavement as I fought for control. The second I stopped, I turned on the interior light and spun around. The back seat was empty. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my hands shaking as I ran them over my face. I was alone, or so I thought. A whisper brushed against my ear. "Keep driving." I didn't waste a second. I threw the car into drive and sped off, not daring to look back. I don't know how long I drove. It felt like hours. When I finally reached my destination, my body ached from the tension. I stepped out, breathing deeply, trying to shake the unease. But as I locked the door and turned to leave, I made one final mistake. I glanced through the window. There, in the back seat, it was waiting, grinning. Third one, the gas station attendant who knew too much. The gas gauge was dangerously close to empty, and my friend and I had been driving for hours through the vast emptiness of the highway. No cars, no houses, just miles of asphalt stretching endlessly into the darkness. When we finally spotted a gas station ahead, it felt like a miracle. But as we pulled in, a strange sense of unease crept over me. The station looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. An old, rusted gas pump stood motionless, its screen barely legible. The place was empty. No cars, no sound, just the faint hum of the buzzing light. I turned to my friend. "You sure this place is open?" He shrugged. "We don't have a choice." Narrator. As I stepped out of the car, a sharp chill ran down my spine. The air felt heavy, as if we'd entered a space that didn't quite belong in the real world. I pushed open the door to the small convenience store, and the bell above the entrance let out a brittle, unnatural chime. That's when I saw him. The attendant stood behind the counter motionless. He was an older man, his face sunken, his eyes hollow and dark. He didn't smile, he didn't blink, he just stared. My throat went dry. Pump 3, I muttered, sliding a few bills onto the counter. His bony fingers slowly reached out, collecting the money. His voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." I let out a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, well, we didn't have much of a choice, running on fumes." He didn't react, he just kept staring. My friend nudged me. "Dude, let's just get the gas and go." I nodded and hurried outside. As I pumped the gas, I felt the attendant's gaze burning into my back through the store window. He hadn't moved. Then something caught my eye in the side mirror. Movement. I turned, expecting to see another customer, but there was nothing, just darkness. My pulse quickened. I scanned the area, my fingers tightening around the gas nozzle. That's when I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, standing just beyond the reach of the flickering light. Their silhouettes barely visible, shifting ever so slightly. My breath hitched. "Get in the car, now," I hissed at my friend. He turned, saw what I saw, and bolted for the door. The moment we slammed the doors shut, I floored the gas pedal. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as we sped out of the station, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded in my chest. "What the hell was that?" my friend shouted. I couldn't answer, I just kept driving. A few miles down the road, I finally let out a breath. My hands were shaking. I glanced at my friend, who was pale as a ghost. "Did you see them?" he asked. I nodded. They were just standing there. He swallowed hard. I think they were waiting. The silence in the car was suffocating. I turned on the radio for some noise, but only static filled the speakers. My stomach churned. Something felt wrong. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there he was, the attendant, sitting in my back seat, smiling. I screamed and swerved the car, nearly crashing into a ditch. The back seat was empty. My friend grabbed my arm, his voice trembling. What the hell is wrong with you? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just drove. And I never looked in the mirror again. Fourth experience. The stranger at the motel. I had been driving for over 14 hours straight, my body aching, my eyelids growing heavier with each mile. The road signs blurred together, and I knew I had to stop for the night. When I spotted a small roadside motel with a flickering vacancy sign, I didn't hesitate. It looked old, almost abandoned, but exhaustion clouded my judgment. All I wanted was a bed. As I pulled into the empty lot, the crunch of gravel under my tires echoed in the still night air. There were no other cars, just mine. That should have been my first warning. The motel office was dimly lit, the neon glow casting eerie shadows through the dusty window. I stepped inside, and the stale air hit me, like the place had been sealed shut for years. The receptionist was a thin man with sunken eyes, his skin unnaturally pale under the buzzing, fluorescent light. He barely looked up as I approached the counter. "Room for one?" I asked. His fingers trembled slightly as he handed me a key. "Room 203, he murmured. I forced a smile. "Busy night?" He hesitated. Then, in a hushed tone, he muttered, "You're the only guest." A shiver ran through me, but I brushed it off as exhaustion. I took the key and headed to my room. The hallway was eerily silent, my footsteps muffled by the worn-out carpet. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, an unsettling sensation crept over me, like I was being watched. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. The bed was made, the furniture old but functional, but something about the room felt off. I locked the door, set my bag down, and collapsed onto the bed. My body ached with relief, but my mind was restless. The room felt too quiet, too still. Then, just as I was drifting off to sleep, tap, tap, tap. My eyes snapped open. The sound came from the door. My heart pounded. I held my breath, waiting. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate. Someone was standing right outside. My fingers tightened around the bedsheet. Then, the doorknob rattled. Panic surged through me. I forced myself to stay silent. My mind raced. Who else was even here? The receptionist had said I was the only guest. I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking. The rattling stopped. Silence. Then, breathing. Right outside my door. Slow, raspy, inhuman. My skin prickled with terror. I wanted to move, to hide, but fear had me frozen. Minutes passed. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. I strained my ears, trying to listen for movement. Then, suddenly, a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the wood. My body tensed. I turned my head ever so slightly toward the peephole. Slowly, carefully, I inched forward and looked through it. Nothing, just darkness. But I knew someone was there. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, just as I was about to step back, a single bloodshot eye appeared on the other side of the peephole, staring directly at me. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my ribs. The door handle shook violently. Whoever, whatever, was outside wanted in. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, clutching it like a weapon. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. Silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Minutes passed, then an hour. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up, the sun was streaming through the window. It was morning. I hesitated before opening the door, my hands still trembling. The hallway was empty, no sign of anyone. I practically ran to the office. The receptionist was still there, staring blankly at the counter. I slammed the key onto the desk. Who else was here last night? My voice came out shaky. He didn't even look up. "I told you," he murmured. "You were the only guest." I left without another word, my skin crawling as I stepped into the daylight. I never looked back, but to this day I wonder who was outside my door that night and what would have happened if I had opened it. Fifth one, the phantom car. It started out like any other late-night drive. Just me, an open highway, and miles of empty road ahead. I loved solo road trips, the freedom, the silence, the way the world seemed to disappear under my tires. But that night, I wasn't alone. I was somewhere in the middle of the desert. No towns for miles. The sky was pitch black, the stars barely visible. I glanced at the clock. 2:43 a.m. The road was empty. No cars behind me, no headlights in my rearview mirror. Just me and the quiet hum of my engine. Then, out of nowhere, headlights. Bright, blinding, appearing far behind me in an instant. My pulse quickened. Where did they come from? There hadn't been a single car on this stretch of road for over an hour. The lights grew brighter, closer. Whoever it was, they were speeding up. Fast. My hands tightened around the wheel. Something about the way the car moved, too smooth, too silent, made my stomach churn. The high beams flashed once, then again. My heart pounded. They were signaling me. But why? I switched lanes, hoping they would pass, but they didn't. They stayed right behind me, matching my speed. The distance between us shrank. The lights grew impossibly bright, almost like they were swallowing me whole. I could barely see. Then, suddenly, darkness. The lights vanished. The road behind me was empty again. The car was gone. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. But then my phone buzzed. A text, unknown number. 3 words, "Check your mirror." My blood turned to ice. My fingers trembled as I adjusted the rearview mirror. And there, sitting in my back seat, was a figure, just sitting there. No face, just a shape. Waiting. I don't remember much after that, just speeding. Driving as fast as I could, refusing to look in the mirror again. I don't know how long I drove, but when I finally dared to check, the back seat was empty. I never found out who or what was in that car, or how it vanished into thin air. But one thing's for sure, I never drive that road at night anymore. Road trips are supposed to be about freedom, adventure, and the thrill of the unknown. But sometimes the unknown is watching. Sometimes the road isn't empty. So next time you take a long drive through the night, check your mirrors. And whatever you do, don't stop for strangers.